So, respected. So, good morning, everybody. Respected resource person, sir. Respected moderator, madam, and all the esteemed participants. Today, we are fortunate to share with you that we have Professor Dr. Padam Nepal, sir, with us. He will speak something on a new issue relating to human rights. So for his presentation, may I request Professor Santi Saya Borua, Madam, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Political Science, JDSG College Bukakhat, an advisor of our organizing committee, to introduce our speaker, sir, and initiate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Santi Saya, Bedu. Santi Saya, ma'am. Santi Saya Borua, Madam, please switch on your mic and please initiate the session. Yeah. Good morning,
Dr. Defenders.
Yeah.
Good morning to one and all present, respected resource person, Dr. Padam Nepal, other respected guests and participants. I, Santi Saya Borua, welcome you all to 17th session of the ICSSR NERC sponsored 1 week interdisciplinary national workshop on human rights education, issues and challenges in Northeast India, organized by CESR Guwahati in association with the Department of Political Science, Moridhal College, Dhemaji, and Department of Political Science, Morigaon College, Morigaon. Now I shall introduce our respected resource person for the day, Dr. Padam Nepal sir, on behalf of the organizing committee. He is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Political Science, St. Joseph College, North Point, Darjeeling. He is a research and development consultant to NGOs and has published papers in a wide range of national and international academic journals of repute. He also has been a resource person for UGC refresher course and ICSSR course on theory and methodology. Besides, he has also authorized and edited several books and research monographs. His books include Environmental Movements, India, Politics of Dynamism and Transformations, and Introductions to Politics, a 2-volume set entitled Politics of Culture, Identity and Protest in Northeast India, and Politics of Exclusion and Inclusion in India, considering communalities and complexities, understanding political science, perspective of public administration and public opinion, and survey research, among others. His research interests including oppression, indigenous research methodologies, critical epistemologies and pedagogies, green political theory, folk and cultural dimension of politics, micropolitics, microhistorians, microhistorians of nation and ethnicity, and spatial, symbolic, and material meditation of social movements. We welcome you, sir. Now I request you to kindly deliver your speech, 1 hour for deliberation and another 15 minutes for discussion and interaction. Please, sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. And let me take the privilege of beginning my presentation. Welcome all participant friends. In fact, this is probably the last technical session of the workshop. And I'm here with a topic that is slightly unconventional in the discussion of human rights in our part of the world. The workshop is pretty interesting in the sense that it talks about human rights education in Northeast India. I firmly believe that in the past sessions, technical sessions, our participants have had enough of discussions on what constitutes human rights, what is human right education, and how it is important in different aspects of realization of human rights. I will be talking today on a topic that is of science, technology, and human rights, exploring their connections and contradictions viewed from a human rights education perspective. Now, this is in fact a very, very wide topic, and a single session of 1 hour probably would not suffice to do justice to the theme. So what I have tried to do today is only a preliminary kind of a discussion on the connectedness between and among these, categories of science and technology on the one hand, and the concerns for human rights on the other. Now, to begin with, I think let me also try to share a file with you. That will be easy, so that you can see the PowerPoints. Okay, screen sharing seems to be disabled. Anyway, so
Sir, thank
can I
you.
request
Sir,
any?
sorry for interruption. I would like to request Dr.
Yeah,
Yogesh Das, coordinator of our workshop, to help him in sharing his screen. Dr. Yogesh Das?
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
It says so. Host has disabled participant screen sharing. Okay.
So now you can share your screen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. Just a minute. Give me a second so that I open my file here. Okay, the screen will be shared. In the meantime, let me continue with the discussion also, right? Lost. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So see, there is some kind of technical error. It seems I'm not being able to open the file. Anyway, I'm trying it. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, is it now visible? The screen is visible?
No, sir. No, sir. Okay.
No?
No, sir.
No, sir, not at all.
Not visible. Okay. what is the problem anyway? Let me try to find out. So it is visible now?
No, sir.
Hello?
No,
No.
sir.
Okay. Let me try again. Now it
Now
should be
visible, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes. Okay. So now the topic as such of the workshop is human rights education in Northeast India. Now, what I'm trying to do here is briefly discuss about what constitutes human rights education, so that we can link it up. There are three things to understand in my presentation. What I'm trying to do is, first, everyone is aware of what constitutes human rights. So what is human rights education and what is Northeast? Because we have been talking about human rights education in Northeast India. So I'll try to link the issues of human rights with Northeast and the issue of science and technology and human rights in the third part. So that's how my presentation would proceed. Now, human rights education, as you are aware, it can be defined as education, training, and information aimed at building a universal culture of human rights, which means that universally we understand and appreciate what would constitute human rights, promoting and safeguarding human dignity. A comprehensive education in human rights not only provides knowledge about human rights and the mechanisms to protect them, but also it imparts the skills needed to promote, defend, and apply human rights in daily life. It is an education that fosters the attitudes and behaviors needed to uphold human rights for all members of society. Now, these points, help us understand what is human rights education. But my contention of understanding human rights education in today's context is slightly complex. I borrow substantially from the works of Gramsci and Michel Foucault, because when we look at human rights education from a simplistic and straightforward perspective like this, probably we'll be missing the pole, will not be able to understand the dynamic aspect of human rights, and therefore the need of dynamism within what is called the human rights education. Because when the contours and complexes of human rights are changing and transforming every moment, what we require is a constantly changing and coping up human rights education. And this transformation is brought about by a kind of struggle that is there in every sphere of human right, concept of human right, the availability of human rights, the conflict of situations where human rights are compromised, and therefore this dynamism takes place. The conflicts are multifaceted, multi-layered, and there is a constant interaction between different forces. And that is what we need to understand if we are trying to understand the whole notion of human rights education. Therefore, I take human rights education as a discourse. Here, human rights education is seen as a struggle. It's a struggle much like in the Gramscian thinking of pedagogy, that is teaching and learning as a site of political struggle. Because what we understand here is, hence, any effort to control the production, distribution, and consumption of human rights education discourse are ultimately about the exercise of power. That's how I see it. According to Michel Foucault, power is dynamic and momentary. It means in an instance of struggle between submission and resistance of power, power can be used to manage possible forms or possibilities of action. Therefore, human rights education is a discourse, then is a part of the transnational site of struggle that exists in permanent relationship of provocation between domination and resistance. That is how I understand human rights education. Now, to further simplify this, what I'm trying to say is, if you are talking about any aspect of human rights, it is determined by, now knowing about human rights is also determined by power, because education, the knowledge and power have a direct relationship, as it is, mutually reinforcing, whereas where knowledge reinforces power and power reinforces knowledge. So there is a relationship between power and knowledge, as it is made explicit thinkers like Michel Foucault. Now, when we're talking about human rights education, how to produce knowledge, distribute knowledge, and consume knowledge, this sphere of activity is also not free from the politics of power dynamics, because power plays there in every sphere of our life, beginning from the household to the international community. There are different factors, agencies of power, and there is a constant struggle between these agencies, and that is what needs to be captured, because that is where, in this dynamism we find the human rights, and it is within this dynamism that we need to locate the human rights education. So therefore it is a kind of constant struggle, a discursive kind of a phenomenon when we talk about human rights education. That is how I try to understand human rights education in the present context, because with this framework only, probably we can understand how science and technology is related and how it determines both human rights education as well as experience of human rights. Now, then we come to the category called the Northeast, because human rights education in Northeast India, again, we need to go back onto the title of the workshop. Northeast is a geostrategically sensitive region, okay, with almost 99% of its border being an international border. It is a very complex kind of a region in terms of backwardness, governance, and development. It's a fertile region for identity and development-based political movements and, of course, insurgencies. Therefore, there is the permanent and both heavy presence of military in Northeast in areas of normal policing as well as civil administration. That's why Sanjeev Borwa calls Northeast as being a region with durable disorder. And because of this, there is intense securitization in Northeast India. Now, this disturbed region, having international border, 99% of its border being international border, having problems of backwardness, people fighting for development, the nature of development, okay, all these produces a kind of constant movement in terms of identity, in terms of development, in terms of security, and therefore this is a heavily securitized zone. And wherever there is heavy securitization, intense securitization, it ultimately leads to what is called vulnerability in terms of human rights violations. So it is a region where we experience maximum amount of human rights violations, and this calls for our understanding of the human rights education, or need for imparting or creating, distributing, and consuming what is called the human rights education. That is why human rights education in Northeast India is the need of the hour, and therefore this discussion becomes valid seen from this perspective. Now, how do we link science and technology when you talk about human rights and Northeast India? one very important aspect here is Northeast is backward, it requires for development. Now, development warrants what? Implementation of various projects, which are, of course, backed by science and technology, number one. Number two, governance has to be transparent, okay, and effective. Effective governance and transparent governance is ensured with the use of technology. Number three, administration. Administration is made efficient through the use of technology. And there is need for securitization that also intense because of what? Insurgencies, violent movements, and securing the national boundaries of the sovereign state of India because of the Northeast sharing 99% of its border with the other countries. So when there is securitization, the present modern understanding of security is again in terms of science and technology, right? Therefore, science, technology, and human rights become very, very relevant when we talk about the Northeast region of India. Now we come to the kind of link between science, technology, and human rights. See, I'm not going to talk about different kinds of conventions or treaties or international law and their provisions in terms of science, technology, and human rights. As I began in the first part of my discussion itself, this is a very, very preliminary kind of a presentation. And therefore, what I'm trying to do here is give a kind of bird's eye view of how we link science and technology with the issues of human rights. Okay, so I found at least 4 different ways in which science and technology is linked with the question of human rights. And these 4 are science and technology may be at the root of human rights problem. Number 1, problem. At the same time, science and technology is at the root of the solution created by science and technology for human rights. So science and technology may be simultaneously at the root of human rights problem, and it is also at the root of the solution of that particular problem. Number 2 situation might be science and technology may be neither at the root of a human rights problem, nor it could be at the root of its solution. Number 3 is possibility of science and technology being not at the root of a human rights problem, but it might be at the root of the solution to a human rights problem. And finally, science and technology may be at the root of human rights problem without being at the root of its solution. So these are the possible 4 important possible linkages between science, technology, and human rights. Okay. Now we come to explanation, brief explanation of these 4 categories that we have talked about. Just simple examples. Okay. The first type of cases is especially germane to the subject of air pollution. Now, when we talk about air pollution, how is it related to human rights? We have right to health, okay, which inevitably involves a right to breathe fresh air, unpolluted, fresh air, right? But it is science and technology that has created a kind of a problem for us where we are not able to breathe in the fresh air. So this is a human rights problem, because air pollution is produced primarily, may not be exclusively, through emission of fumes from automobiles, exhaust, and industrial smokestacks. The phenomenon of smog, which is now virtually taken for granted in urban and industrial centers, it infringes on the enjoyment of human right to health. Looking at ecological problems from the vantage point of human rights, it signifies that every person has an interest protected by law to live in uncontaminated surroundings. Now, so we have this right of living in uncontaminated surroundings or environment, but our surrounding is contaminated. Now, can we ascertain this right? Now, what we have done in course of time through covenants, through agreements, through international law and their provisions is that we have determined certain levels of pollution which is acceptable and levels beyond which we are not ready to accept because that jeopardizes human health, okay, and takes away our right to good health. In this situation, what helps us to determine what is the permittable level of pollution? It is again science and technology. Using technology, we can determine what is the optimum level of pollution beyond which we cannot go. And in that case, we can put a ban on the application of such science and technology in our lives. And that will ensure that we enjoy right to good health. So given this, what we see here is, given this, the will to do or determine the levels, all pollution hazards may be categorized as contraventions to human rights at certain levels, which is determined by the application of science and technology. Hence, what we see here in this kind of situation is that science and technology has become a problem. It is at the root of a human rights problem, but at the same time, science and technology helps us address this kind of a problem. Now, second kind of an instance, as I already gave you, is science and technology may be neither at the root of a human rights problem nor at the root of its solution. Now, in this, we can explain this like this. The second type of linkage between science, technology, and human rights is largely based on an optical illusion kind of a thing. By way of illustration, what we can say is, as a result of recent scientific advances, it is now possible through prenatal and at times even preconceptual parental screening to determine whether a fetus is afflicted with certain defects. Now, if a fetus is afflicted with certain defects, if it is found, we understand that when the baby is born, the baby will be a deformed baby. The deformed baby, raising the deformed baby will be a very difficult task for the parents as well as the society. It will be a burden on the family and society. So we could have a kind of collective interest not to have that baby and to go for kind of collective will to abort the baby in the womb itself so that the baby is not born. So this collective interest may, however, collide with another right. Yes? Is there any problem?
All participants are
It
requested
might
to unmute
collide.
the mic.
Yeah, it might collide with other rights. For instance, the right of the prospective mother to give birth to her child, the love of the mother towards the child. Okay, so the right of
Okay.
motherhood. So all these come into a kind of conflict. But if you look at the problem is the ethical question of abortion, right of motherhood, but science is not asking us to abort. Science is giving us the possibility of a newborn baby becoming a deformed child. We are able to determine that. Okay. Now the problem is where human rights problem is created by the other areas. The legal system might forbid abortion. It might forbid, kind of disowning a child before birth. So these are in conflict with the practice of human rights. But what is going to be the solution? Now, solution could be abortion, okay, but that is also, the technique is there in science, but science does not, dictate us to go for abortion. So the issue here is science and technology, though ostensibly involved, okay, ostensibly involved, are in fact at the root of neither of the problem, because the problem here is congenital deformity or mental retardation of the prospective child. Now, that is already there by nature. It was only determined by science. So science is not at the root of the problem, nor science is at the root of the possible solution, that is abortion of the child. So science and technology is facilitating, but it is not, it is neither at the root of the problem, it is nor at the root of the solution. So this is a second kind of a situation where science and technology is related with human rights. The third situation is science and technology may be neither at the root of human rights problem. Sorry, this is second one. May not be at the root of the human rights problem, yet it may be at the root of the human rights solution. Now, the example in this aspect is science and technology, while at not at the root of the human rights problem, are at the root of the solution. Take organ transplantation, for example. The scarcity of human organs, okay, available for transplantation creates an excess of demand over supply, okay. Now, there might be a situation where in a hospital in critical condition, 4 patients are waiting for the transplantation of heart or kidney. Now, transplantation is possible because of science, okay, but science cannot decide who can get the benefit of transplantation out of these 4 patients if the situation is such that the availability of the kidney or the heart is only 1. So if only 1 donor has accepted to donate, whom are we going to transplant? If we are transplanting to A, B, C, and D will be excluded from the right to continued or extended life, okay. So, and vice versa. So we cannot decide. There is an ethical dilemma, there is a political dilemma, there is a problem of policy, okay, in this context. But science and technology has facilitated the process. It is possible. Now, what we have said here is it may not be at the root of a human rights problem. So the science's ability to transplant the human organs is not at the human rights problem. It has the ability. It can save the life. It can extend the life. But it in itself does not constitute a problem for human rights, or it does not violate human rights, okay. But what is the solution? What is the solution in this context? Human rights, the problem of this human rights situation, right of extended life, okay, right to life, in other words, it is possible to be addressed for all C, D, B, C, and D, not only for A, and that is made possible again by science and technology. On ethical grounds, the problem is never possible to be solved. Why? Because there is only one, okay, only one organ that is available, and there are 4 patients waiting for transplantation. So on a patient. So in that case, our reasoning might fail, okay. So what kind of solution can be found and where? We do not find a proper solution in moral or ethical spheres, okay. We do not find it in normal public policies, and the possibility of finding a solution lies in technological grounds. Issue can be settled on technological grounds. For instance, it is possible to replace human organs by artificial devices, which will make it unnecessary to search for donors for transplantation. So further development of technology, it is possible to transplant an artificial kidney or an artificial heart, much like transplantation of an artificial limb. So that is possible. So in this case, what we find is science and technology might not create a human rights issue, a problem, but it might address a human rights issue, human rights problem, and be at the root of its solution. And the fourth kind of linkage that we have is to exemplify again, there are instances in which science and technology are only at the human rights problem, but they are not at the root of its solution. A simplest example is that of polygraph test or breathalyzer. Breathalyzer is, it's a very common device. When we drive in cities and towns, in the highways, we come across police, using a kind of breathalyzer to see whether the driver, the person who is driving a car, is intoxicated or not. Okay, that's a kind of breathalyzer. Now, these devices are produced by modern technology. Okay, they are produced by a modern technology. Now, but they create a problem. In what way they create a problem? Which can be used to undermine the fundamental freedom of self-incrimination. Now, if you test positive in the breathalyzer, when you are tested for consumption of alcohol while driving, testing positive means what? It means that you have given evidence that you are guilty. So it is a kind of device that forces a kind of self-incrimination in an individual. So I am a witness against myself, and that takes away a lot of our rights. Number one is fundamental freedom from right to self-incrimination, that is taken away. Number two, right to silence or not to speak out, that is taken away. Okay, so because the instrument, when used, they make us vulnerable. Our denial means, again, denial to be tested with a breathalyzer means what? That we are conceding our guilt. When we go for tests, if we are found positive, again we have become evidences to our own guilt. So in that way, it creates a human rights problem, right? But this is not up to, again, science and technology to determine, okay, to determine whether you are actually guilty or not. The science and technology only devised this device, but the results of this are unconcerned for science and technology. The results are used by the law courts and police, okay? And therefore, the solution is not provided by the science and technology. There is no technological solution to this particular problem created by devices created by science and technology. Here, rights are taken away, okay? There is infringement of, very serious infringement of human rights, like rights of self-incrimination, kind of conceding of guilt by an individual, or taking away the right to silence as a kind of protest against self-incrimination. These human rights are taken away by the invention of these devices. So science and technology comes at the root of a human rights problem without having the ability to address the problem. Okay, so these are the four major types of interconnectedness that we find between science and technology. Now, these are just instances. When we come to science, technology, and human rights, there are a lot many things that we recognize which have kind of direct relationship between the human rights. The World Economic Forum, it highlighted 12 types of technology that merit close attention in the context of human rights. Now, what are these 12 types of technology that were identified by the World Economic Forum? They are new computing technologies, blockchain and distributed laser technologies, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and robotics, advanced materials, additive manufacturing and multidimensional printing, biotechnologies, neurotechnologies, virtual reality and augmented reality, energy capture, storage and transmission, geoengineering, space technologies. All these have some kind of relationship in terms of violation of human rights or protection of human rights. Given the time space today, we do not have much of the space, the flexibility in terms of time to discuss all these categories. So for the present purpose, we shall take only a few exemplary instances and try to dig out how science and technology is related to human rights, both in terms of realization of human rights or deprivation of human rights. Now, it is needless to point out how science and technology has led to realization of a lot of human rights. For instance, any kind of attempt to strengthen human rights and human rights issues for advocacy, for everything, we can use ICT technologies, okay? Internet communication technologies. They are used for advocacy, for finding the case, for campaign, and to fight against human rights violations, okay? Other type of science and technology used for protection and furtherance of human rights are, for instance, technologies, biotechnologies used in the production of food, because everyone has the right to food. Food security, an important dimension of human rights. And it is the intervention of science and technology that has led to increased food productivity in the recent years through kind of genetically modified food, okay? We talk about a high yielding variety of crops. So all these are nothing but technological intervention in making food grains available to the human population, ensuring the right to food safety and food security. Similarly, there are also a lot of instances where medical biotechnology has led to treatment of some chronic diseases, trying to intervene with the human body in terms of viral infections. A lot of technologies have developed where right to good life, right to good health, right to disease-free life are ensured by science and technology. Despite these positive contribution of science and technology in the field of human rights realization and furtherance, what we see is equally strong negative side of human rights violations that emanate from the application of science and technology. Now, this part, what I'm going to do is talk briefly about how human rights violations take place because of application of science and technology. Of course, let us acknowledge that a lot of international treaties, agreements, international law, covenants, they have come up through the annals of history to protect us from the possible violation of human rights from the intervention of science and technology. but yet we are still a long way to go, because when we are teaching about human rights, when we are experiencing, when we are having lived experience of human rights, what we see is that with the growth of science and technology, newer forms of human rights violations take place, and the existing laws and covenants fail to address these issues. So there is a need to again, kind of revise and grow with newer forms of rights, newer forms of regulations. So there is a kind of discursive or dialectical relationship between human rights and technology. And this is also again mediated by the power in different forms. For instance, today's world is a capitalist age. Today we talk about digital capitalism. Today we talk about brain capitalism. Today we talk about neurocapitalism. These capital houses, somehow what they do is build a kind of technological cartel, and the power is so strong that it also determines the nature of human rights education, the production of human rights education, the distribution of human rights education, and the consumption of human rights education. With the kind of determination of what human rights education or knowledge is produced, what is distributed, and what is consumed, these cartels also are able to determine what would constitute human rights and what would not. Therefore, sometimes it so happens that the whole idea of human rights under this kind of circumstances is confounded. We are confused whether something is a right or it is beyond a right. So that is the present situation. Now, I'll be having a few cases to talk about such kind of interventions and human rights violations. And I have taken three important sectors here. One is internet communication technology and human rights, where I briefly discuss artificial intelligence, new 3D printing, use of drones, and their relationship with human rights. Number two, within ICT and human rights, I discuss Internet of Things and human rights. Then next, I'll be talking about electromagnetic weapons and human rights, where electromagnetic weapons, when I'm talking about electromagnetic weapons, I'm also basically talking about I'll be talking about what is called the mind control devices. Okay, mind control devices. And in that, the focus will be on remote neural monitoring technology, that is RNM technology. RNM, that is remote neural monitoring. It's a kind of a weapon, a device. Okay. Then the last category I'll be talking about would be biotechnologies and human rights, where I take only two examples. One is genetic modification of human beings, and number two is surrogacy with reference to new reproductive technologies and how they impinge on human rights issues. Now let's take the first one, artificial intelligence. What is it? It is being used to treat various terminal illnesses. Okay, that is how it has been developed as a part of medical science also. Yet it can also entrench or exacerbate inequality when used as a tool of predictive policing. Thus, artificial intelligence generates challenges for human rights. Now, artificial intelligence can be used to cure terminal diseases. Again, artificial intelligence might be used as a tool of surveillance, okay, and predictive policing. In that case, what we do is we jeopardize the personal rights of an individual, human rights of an individual. There are many other functions of artificial intelligence which I'm not getting into. I'm just giving you the examples. Second one is new 3D printing technology that has come of age recently. Very soon, it might enable an amputated limb to be replaced quickly and cheaply by highly effective printed prosthesis, okay, computer printed prosthesis, and it may be added as a limb that would function pretty well like a natural limb. But the danger is that the same technology could be used to print a gun and use to terrorize people, take away the rights of people. The third category within the ICT devices is a communicating device called drones. Drones fly with surveillance cameras, etc. They move from one place to another. For instance, blood can be transported by drone to a scene of an accident in times of emergency to save a human life. But the same drones can also be used to fire weapons or perform surveillance and breach individual privacy or take away the human right to privacy. So this is how the new communication technologies also impact on human rights. Next one is I talked about IoT. Now this IoT, Aston had used it, okay, initially the concept. It is the network of physical objects or things that are embedded with sensors, softwares, and other technologies for the purpose of connecting and exchanging data with other devices and systems over the internet. The devices range from ordinary household objects to sophisticated industrial tools. Now, this is the category called Internet of Things. Now, for instance, we have internet, okay? Now, what do we do in everyday life? The way today we are doing, we have connected our cell phones to the internet. We have connected our iPads and laptops to the internet. Now, while doing that, what we have done is we have allowed the internet to access our data, okay? We have allowed the internet to access our data. IoT means we have several devices like microwave oven, which can be run through a remote enabled by the internet, okay? It could be a kind of a music system run with Bluetooth, okay? It could also be laptops, mobile phones, anything that is connected with the World Wide Web, okay? That is called Internet of Things. Now, what happens is when we connect to the internet, these things, okay, they help us a lot in easing our everyday work. So science and technology, it gives us the right to leisure, right to rest, okay, because the things that we have, kind of connected with the internet, okay, with the other devices in the net, now they are able to perform our work. But at the same time, there is a danger, a huge danger looming in front of us that has the potential of taking away our rights. IoT, what it does is it constantly collects information on the use of these connected items, which makes data privacy vulnerable. It often leads to intercepting private information. Okay, your private information might be intercepted and violate and jeopardize our confidentiality, security, safety, right to life, and right to privacy. So this is how ICT technologies might jeopardize human rights. Now I come to another category, and that is electromagnetic mind control devices or weapons and techniques and human rights violations or human rights promotions. Now, what are these electromagnetic mind control weapons? These are most feared and highly controversial weapons of the modern age. Using these, human brain and nervous system could be controlled remotely through electronic microchip implants, nanotechnologies, extremely low frequency modulated microwaves or electromagnetic waves or beams, able to cause psychological and physical damage to an individual. Okay. Now, one of these type of electromagnetic mind control weapons, okay, is a remote neural monitoring device. Okay. Before I come to that, let me make one more point clear. Such devices or weapons are used for torturing a suspected terrorist, okay, or someone who is found to be or alleged to be apprehended to be jeopardizing our national security, when it is used in terms of or used by military or security agencies. So you might be able to, control someone else's mind, inflict physical and psychological pain, and get kind of information from that person as a mechanism of torture and extraction of information. So electromagnetic mind control weapons have come up today, and these are very dangerous in terms of infringement of human rights. Now, what is this remote neural monitoring system, RNM? It is an illegal mind surveillance system. It is a form of functional neuroimaging claimed to have been developed by the National Security Agency of the USA. That is, now this device is capable of extracting electroencephalogram, that is EEG data from human brain from at a distance with no direct contact with the person, or no electrodes are also required. So from a remote, from a distance, physical distance, our brain can be controlled, they can be monitored, okay, and that is called remote neural monitoring device or mechanism. Okay, now they may be used from distance to control and extract the data from the mind. Okay, it is claimed that National Security Agency of the USA, it has the capability to decode the data extracted with the help of remote neural monitoring device. Decode this data to extract sub-vocalizations, visual and auditory data from the mind or the brain of an individual. In effect, it allows access to a person's thought without their knowledge or permission. Okay, so that is how these devices work, and they are produced by science and technology. See, for instance, a small picture. A person is subject to RNM, okay, from a distance without anyone coming directly into physical contact with the person. Okay, now if this technology further grows, so far we have not been able to comprehend what kind of protective mechanisms can be developed, okay, from developed by international organizations or national legal systems to combat against possible infringement of human rights through these technologies. They are further growing. There is a possibility that at any point of time, what we think can be extracted from our mind and might be stored in the cloud to be accessed by any person who wants it. So the best brains might have wonderful thoughts, wonderful images, wonderful abilities stored in the mind in the form of a data of invention, of poetry, of art, which could be stored in the cloud and can be sold to the highest bidder. So today we live in the age of neurocapitalism where this is possible. So far, law is not ready to protect our neuro rights or brain rights. So this is the situation we are heading on to. Okay, and next one that we'll be talking about is biotechnologies and human rights. Here we talk about genetic modification of human beings. Okay, this also has a very long history, a complex procedure, complex levels, but we are not going to get into hierarchies of genetic modifications, what has been permitted so far, what is not permitted. For instance, genetic modification, so far it is said that international law allows therapeutic level of genetic modification. But who determines and what are the exact parameters for determination of what constitutes therapeutic and what does not constitute therapeutic is a big question. It has not been resolved, right? So therefore, genetic modification of human beings is also a potential threat to human rights. With the advancement of bio and nanotechnologies, projects for design of human bodies are being developed. For instance, a recent news that came from a lab in the People's Republic of China that is alarming. The most such projects include making genetically modified children with specific qualities like strength, intelligence, etc. In most legal orders, human germline modification or gene editing is either prohibited or severely restricted. A recurring thought in these legal framework is that heritable genome editing would result in practices that are at odds with principles of human rights, such as dignity, justice, and equality. For instance, in the age of capitalism, where there is already a gap between a rich and a poor, if the rich people are able to exploit the benefits of capitalism and benefits of genetic modification, germline modification, and produce children who are highly intelligent, strong, and if that is put in the heritable gene, then what in future we are going to create is gene-based social stratification of the human population that will accentuate to an infinite level the kind of inequality between the two sets of people. People who are naturally born of natural genes, whose genes are not modified, or where we have not intervened with the human gene. So there could be a sharp, kind of differentiation, and inequality would be accentuated. That is possible. However, existing human rights human rights frameworks are arguably insufficient to regulate germline genome editing, resulting in gross human rights violations. So this is another area which needs concern. So this is a brief picture on how gene editing takes place. Okay. The fourth and the final one that I would like to talk today, let me see time, we have 10-15 minutes more, is surrogacy, new reproductive technologies, and human rights. Okay. Where at stake are our right to motherhood and rights of the child. Okay. Now, these are the issues that we are going to talk about. Now, I begin here with a proposition. Now, when we're talking about new reproductive technologies, what are we basically talking about? We are talking about the possibilities of ovum transfer and surrogate gestation. Okay. But in this case, what are the positive things? How does it contribute to human rights? Now, there is a desire of being a mother. Okay. There is a right to child of the parents. Now, if there are infertile parents, they could always take the benefit of science and technology, go for surrogacy, and have their right to parenthood become a reality. So science has been able to contribute to that. And this has also resulted in a lot of controversies where a lot of other forms of human rights are violated. Now, one simple proposition is through ovum transfer and surrogate gestation, what is possible is a child can have 3 mothers. Now, this is a proposition where I find things difficult. So I have highlighted this before I come for the explanation. Who are the 3 mothers? Number one is that mother who would like to have a child, but and goes for surrogacy. But she is not herself the surrogate mother. Okay. There is mother number 2 who supplies the egg of the child. And there is mother number 3 who supplies the womb for surrogacy. So ultimately, there are 3 people involved in a childbirth. One has the desire to be a mother and sponsors everything for a child. The other, gives the service of the womb. The third gives the service of the egg. So who is the legitimate mother? At the end of the day, there are three mothers. And if we forget looking at the rights of the mothers, but at least there is a question of the right of the child. Who is the most legitimate, rightful custody of the child? Okay. So right to mothership of a child is lost because there are three, and there is no possibility or even a single ethically or morally correct way of determining who is the actual mother. Okay. And that, takes away the right of the child to safe custody. Now let us come to this for a brief discussion of the example. Okay. Now what I've done here is I begin with the case of baby M. The baby M case pertains to the girl child Melissa, who is said to have recently graduated, completed her studies. Now this famous case is used in several explanations of the theories of justice also. Say for instance, it has been used by Professor Michael Sandel when he delivers a series of lectures on justice. He designates this case as pregnancy for pay. You will find this as a piece in Michael Sandel's Justice, What is the Right Thing to Do? The case here is William and Elizabeth Stem. These are a couple. William Stem is a biochemist and Elizabeth Stem is a pediatrician. Now they desire to have a child without having Elizabeth Stem to go to a hospital or undergo any medical treatment. Okay, and they decide to go for surrogacy. This is a case that took place in 1985-86. They find a 29-year-old Mary Beth Whitehead who wills to give her service for surrogacy, and they sign an agreement. The deal is for $10,000 US for giving the service, and that the couple would also pay for the hospital expenses of the entire time from conception to childbirth. Now in 1986, Mary Beth, she gives birth to a girl child, but when she gives a birth to a girl child, she realizes that she cannot give the baby to William and Elizabeth Stem. She cannot part with the baby. And therefore what she does is she runs away from New Jersey to Florida. Then the case takes place. Okay, the case goes under a series of scrutiny. First, at the lower court, the contract between the couple and the surrogate mother is regarded as a valid contract with informed consent, and that she has to return the baby and take the money. That has been decided. But again, when the case goes to the Supreme Court, the entire premise of the case is it is overturned, because in that the judge decides that Whitehead was not under an informed consent when she was signing the contract, and asked why, judge says that she did not have the knowledge of experience what she would be experiencing at the birth of the girl child. The particular experience, the knowledge of that experience was not there when she signed the contract. So it was not a fully, informed kind of a contract. So the contract was invalid. However, the child was a biological child of William because it was his sperm that was artificially inseminated into the womb of Mary Whitehead. So she's also the legal biological mother. Now, ultimately what court does is sends Melissa to the custody of her biological father on other grounds of safety, security, and proper treatment and upbringing of the child. Says that she gave the service, so for the service she can take the money, but it categorically says that no surrogacy in a commercial way can be practiced, because in a civilized society there are some things that money cannot buy. Now here, this particular argument is very interesting in the sense that it follows Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative as a form of a supreme form of principle of morality. Now, I would like to deal on that slightly at a later stage when I try to conclude. Now, this is the first instance. After that, a lot of laws pertaining to surrogacy has taken place throughout the world, and many countries have banned what is called commercial surrogacy. But looking at the need, non-commercial surrogacy is allowed, and a lot of moral and ethical questions that came up with the baby M case were settled, and they were made very sharp and clear later on with the further advancement of technology. What happened with the advancement of technology? I'll just give you an example. In this case, if you look at the kind of package that was available for surrogacy, what do you find? William and Elizabeth could buy a single package. The single package was that a surrogate mother supplied a bundle of the womb and the egg. So a kind of bundled package of womb and the egg was supplied by the surrogate mother. Okay, and therefore she herself became the biological mother because it was her egg, it was her womb, right? So a lot of ethical questions now became untangled with the development of another technology called IVF. Today we talked about IVF and fertility clinics, etc. Right? What is IVF? It is in vitro fertilization. Now, this development of in vitro fertilization reproductive technique, what it has done is that it has opened new vistas. You can have a female egg from a separate person. You can have the male egg from a separate person, and you can transplant the possible baby into the womb of a third person. So it has unbundled, and today it comes in an unbundled form where the question of being a biological mother is done away with, okay, because it is not our egg, it is only the womb, only the service of the womb is there. So all these issues have come. Now, similar kind of issues were found in abundance in India. At least in India, we experienced these three important cases. One was a Japanese couple, okay, they came to India in Gujarat, in Anand. They got a surrogate mother, gave birth to a child. Later on, before they took the child, there was a separation of this couple, and therefore the newborn child out of a surrogate mother became parentless. So what is the right of the child? Now, going back to Japan again, these two people were separated, but the grandmother of the child, or the male Japanese male parents mother, she took the child, and now she's at her custody. But the problem is she's not been able to get the Japanese citizenship because Japan does not recognize surrogacy and therefore does not give citizenship to a child born of a surrogate mother. So this was a case that took place in 2008. Similarly, in 2012, a poor woman in Chennai, she came into contact with an Australian couple, okay, through a rickshaw puller, and agreed to be a surrogate mother. Okay. Now, ultimately, what happened was she gave birth to a child which was taken, okay, healthy child. The payment had to be divided between the rickshaw puller who arranged for surrogacy and the person who gave the service. And for the purpose for which he gave the service was to, buy a small shop nearby and run the shop for livelihood. That was not met. Okay. The third important case that took place in India was in 2014. A 26-year-old girl named Yuma Sherpa. She was admitted to a private clinic in New Delhi. Why? Because she wanted to donate female eggs, her eggs, okay, harvest her eggs and donate it. And she was admitted to a private clinic in Delhi. But in course of surgery for the harvesting of the egg, she died in the clinic. So this was another tragic case that took place in India. Following all these, what we have in India today is, for the protection of these rights, we have come with the Surrogacy Regulation Bill 2016. It bans commercial surrogacy. It regulates surrogacy and surrogacy procedures. Okay. It does not allow taking money for surrogacy, but what it allows is the payment of medical bills. It also says surrogacy will be allowed only once. It also says Indians cannot give service to foreign nationals on surrogacy. But if you closely examine the recent practices, the kind of business cartels that have developed in the human fertility industry, you will find that there is a huge black market of what is called the reproductive technologies and surrogacy taking place in India. And there are also similarly a lot of loopholes in the Indian Surrogacy Regulation Bill that leads to gross human rights violations. Now, when we have seen all these cases, how do we relate it to Northeast? Again, Northeast has a boundary with the international other countries. It has 99% of its boundary being international. Therefore, there is a possibility. Now let's go reverse. In terms of people being hired or sold for surrogacy in the international reproductive health market. Okay, so that is possible to take place in Northeast because it is in the it has a lot of international border. Access to other countries is easy. Number two, it is backward and people are still struggling for livelihood. Number three, there is not fruits of development. There is no employment opportunity. So all this coupled, the possibility of underground commercial surrogacy taking place, leading to violation of women's rights and child rights, is massive when we look at the Northeast region. Therefore, human rights, science and technology has to be understood. It has to be imparted in the curriculum of human rights education, and the mediations between the power cartels, the business houses, science and technology industry, government, the mafia, and also the kind of the brokers in between has to be understood in a continuous kind of interaction. Otherwise, we cannot stop possible human rights violations. Similarly, when we come to genetic modification, we are at artificial intelligence and genetic modification. We are having a lot of border with China in the Northeast. China has already experimented. Think of possible security threats to Northeast India and also to the entire of India coming from such genetically modified humans, possibly in future jeopardizing Indian security. And when through Northeast is Indian security is jeopardized, it means first victim is the Northeast population itself. So therefore, we need to consider this in our human rights education. Look at artificial intelligence or biotechnology or any form of intervention of science and technology, including the ICT communication technology. Northeast is highly securitized. It needs, and therefore military presence is there. Military might be requiring under compulsion to make use of these technologies for the protection of the sovereign territorial integrity of India. While doing so, there may be, it may directly or indirectly collide with the possible human rights of the population in the Northeast. So therefore, tying up, the necessity to comprehend the emerging technologies and their implications for human rights and incorporating it in the human rights education, trying to understand human rights education itself from the vantage point of interaction between power and knowledge becomes absolutely necessary in the present day context. This is my take on the topic, and I thank each and everyone for your patient listening. Thank you so much. And if there is some time, we can have interactions. Thank you. So I welcome if there is any interaction.